just in case you're kind of newer to our community, we don't have like a preacher here. So, the media has called us an atheist church, which it's not that. And but I do speak from time to time. But we try to bring in a diversity of voices. So if you don't like what I have to say today, just hang in there another week and you'll hear something else. But we do try to bring in different points of view because this isn't about proclaiming the truth from a pulpit, but we're just thinking it out loud together. That's what I like to say. And so it was over the holidays. I was visiting with my kiddos, and somehow the topic of Dr. Strangelove came up. And the minute that came up, my kids started spouting out quotes from the movie back and forth, and they were just cracking up. All the famous lines like, "Mandrake, have you ever seen a commie drink water before?" Or General Ripper's fears about the communist conspiracy to sap and impurify all of our precious bodily fluids. And of course, the most famous line of the movie, "Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room." Yeah, all right. All right. Good. I was struck by the fact that young adults in their early 20s who lived long after the events of the Cold War were resonating with a movie that was made around the time that I was born and could still find it very funny. And we had this kind of bonding, because I didn't know they knew about Dr. Strangelove. And so we had this kind of bonding experience over that. And it reminded me, that, well, it's kind of like when you find people that know a movie that it's like a little, like, oh, there's someone else who belongs to my tribe kind of feeling, right? Like we have this kinship that we didn't know about. Happens with a lot of movies. They have all the movie theaters have these quote-along showings of Lebowski and Rocky Horror. Yeah, okay. Don't start throwing stuff. Okay. Or Monty Python and the Holy Grail, of course, and where you can gather with other people who appreciate the films and you can quote along together. Now, I guess you could sit at home and watch the movie and quote the movie as you go and say the lines out loud all by yourself, but that wouldn't be any fun. In fact, it'd be a little weird, I think. It would feel weird, wouldn't it? Because we want to share the experience. We want to do the quote along with other people who are quoting along with us. It's the quintessential tribal experience. We crave that sense of connection, that sense of belonging. And if you're one of the people that doesn't get Dr. Strangelove, that just kind of reinforces the sense of tribal unity because you clearly just don't get it. And you're not, and it makes the tribe feel a little bit more elite, a little more special, because there are people that are clearly not of the tribe. And of course, there's nothing magical about this. Everything, this craving that we have for being part of a tribe is, hardwired into us by hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. We sought out tribes as a survival mechanism. We found protection in the tribe. Explains an awful lot about us, and we could go, you could talk all day long about this, like our fear of rejection is basically a fear of being kicked out of the tribe and having to fend for yourself on your own and, probably die out in the wilderness, or the reason we experience emotional pain in the same way that we experience physical pain, which is tied to that notion of rejection. All of this goes back to the kind of the evolutionary roots of our tribal ancestry, which really shaped who we are on so many levels. And the tribal instinct is so deeply ingrained that for most of us, one tribe isn't nearly enough, right? I started thinking about this with the Dr. Strangelove thing, that's a little tribe I didn't realize existed before. What are some of the other tribes? Well, there's your NASCAR tribe. There's your fantasy football tribe. Pretty soon we're going to be filling out our brackets for the March Madness tribe. There's all these layers of tribes that we participate in. If you go to a country and western bar in Houston, people who have never seen the inside of a barn, much less ever ridden a horse, will show up in boots and hats and the whole gear. And what? Spurs. Really? Okay. And that is because that's the uniform for that tribe of people who frequent country and western bars. Has nothing to do with, maybe that's where you're living out your passion if you can't be a cowboy during the day. I don't know. Latino bars. They have I'm sure you have uniforms for everything. Well, they have the pointy boots. That was a big thing in parts of Mexico, the super pointy boots. That's not, if you haven't Googled pointy Mexican boots, it's just, yeah, which you probably haven't. Yeah. You really should, because it's fascinating. Because it was like this fashion thing that just went, hey, what's the term for this in evolution? A runaway effect, I think, where it's just the boots got pointier and pointier, and then they started curling up, and like they can hardly walk in these. But then these guys are in these dance troupes that do these intricate dances wearing the pointy boots. That's very much a tribal deal. You can see our evolution marked all over that. It's fascinating. How'd you get me on that thing? I don't know where I am now. Okay. Oh, well, I read somewhere once we have a special connection to tribes that we were exposed to as youngsters, like the early tribes. And I know for me, I grew up in Baltimore, and so the first Major League Baseball games I ever went to were Orioles games. And I've not lived in Baltimore for decades, but the Orioles are still really the only team that I have any emotion for. It's not a conscious decision. I am not willing myself to be an Orioles fan. It's just, I care. I am hardly a sports nut, but I can still tell you the name of every infielder on the Orioles roster when I was a kid. Back when the Astros were in the National League, and whenever the Cubs were in town, Minute Maid Park would be packed. Not with Astros fans, because I don't think there are any, but okay, sorry. See, tribes. Okay, but there's be packed with Houstonians who had roots in Chicago, and there's a lot of them, and so the stadium is filled with Cubs gear. They didn't travel from Chicago; they're the transplanted Cubs tribe, and the Cubs will always be their team. I get that. Did you ever try to like a new team and it just doesn't work? I've tried that a few times. I feel like I should broaden I shouldn't be so parochial in who I root for and stuff. And so my brothers and my kids all went to the University of Texas. So I kind of root for UT in an obligatory kind of way. But, I just don't feel anything. I do not get physically ill watching UT lose the way I get when I watch Michigan lose, which is pretty much all the time. And I'm sorry, whoever thought that burnt orange would be an attractive color? I mean, it looks like a rusted water pipe, really. I mean, there's 64 colors in the crayon box, and that's the best they could do. There's other shades of orange, I'm sorry. Now, maize and blue, those are school colors. But don't call it yellow or gold, or my people will get upset. My people call it maize, okay? It's a tribal thing. Tribes have incredible staying power. They tend to stick around a long time. And what you do for your tribe, this is kind of dovetailing nicely with Jesse and I did not coordinate this today. It was the secular spirit moving. What you do for your tribe could well outlast what you do in many of your other contributions in life. Heck, your tribe may be the closest thing we get to immortality. Business guru Seth Godin writes, I like this one, and he's a business guy, but he said this: build a company and you'll leave a trace. A factory, advertising, the non-recyclable junk produced as a result of your efforts. Tribes, though, aren't about stuff. They're about connection. I thought that was really powerful. And it made me think, getting back to my Baltimore days again, let me ask this, because this is kind of a two-part question. How many people have ever heard of Sparrows Point? Okay, just a handful, right? Which I expected. I expected about a handful. When I grew up in Baltimore, Sparrows Point was the home of the largest steel mill complex on the planet Earth. Bethlehem Steel's Sparrows Point plant. It's where my Eastern European immigrant grandfather worked for most of his adult life. This plant employed thousands and thousands of people. It was massive, like you wouldn't believe. It was surrealistic, like with these belching blast furnaces and flames and smoke everywhere. And it was an awesome sight. And it employed thousands and thousands of people. It was the lifeblood of the community. It was like a city unto itself. And this place was an icon of American industrial and corporate power. People who lived near or worked at the Point, which is what they called it, the Point, could not imagine a world without Bethlehem Steel. Unimaginable. Powerful corporation. A few years ago, they tore down the last remnants of the Sparrows Point steel mill. It had been shut down for years. Bulldozed the land flat, and they put in upscale condominiums on the waterfront there. No sign, not even a trace. I'm sure they left a lot of bad stuff in the soil. I wouldn't live in a condo on the Point, but anyway. But you guys see what I'm saying? It's like not a trace that the largest steel mill the world had ever known ever even existed. It's gone. We live in a culture that sometimes almost worships the power of great corporations and the leaders of these organizations, the so-called job creators. But the reality is that corporations can be rather transitory things, right? Gone like that before you know it. Now, what I said, a few of you, only a few have heard of Sparrows Point, which is what I expected. How many of us here have ever heard of the Grateful Dead? Yeah, like almost everybody has heard of the Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead grossed more than $100 million in their career as a band together. Actually, they're still making money. But they didn't succeed in the music business by selling records. They were never a top 40 band. I think they may have had like one album that ever made the top 40. They succeeded by attracting and building a tribe. Going to a Grateful Dead concert wasn't just about going to listen to the music. Even more so than for many other bands, going to a Grateful Dead concert was an event in and of itself, a shared experience with a tribe. You went to be part of the tribe. And the model that they developed changed the music industry and has had an impact on other industries as well. Jerry Garcia has been dead for a long time, but the influence and legacy continue. Which is interesting to me so what had a greater impact on and I don't know if you can measure things in this way, I'm just making stuff up, but massive, incredible steel corporation, and then the Grateful Dead. Way more of you had heard of the Grateful Dead than had heard of the largest steel plant in the world. Maybe Jerry Garcia had a bigger impact on American life than Bethlehem Steel Corporation. I don't know. But it's been a lasting thing. I mean, it's still chugging along. Now, by contrast, many people are wondering whatever happened to the Arab Spring. Remember just a few years ago, all those public squares were filled with people out marching for their freedom in the Middle East, and then the whole thing kind of fizzled, and in Egypt they got rid of their authoritarian president, then they ended up with someone just as bad, and they got rid of him, and they're back to this kind of military dictatorship thing, I guess. I don't know, but it's bad. Hasn't gotten any better. Some pundits have suggested that one problem with the movement was that it wasn't really a movement. The people who organized the Arab Spring successfully used social media to generate crowds. Yeah, using Facebook and Twitter, you can get a lot of people out for something. But they weren't connected any other way other than through that. There were no other connections. By contrast, the civil rights movement of the 1960s leveraged the connections that people already had through already existing strong civic organizations, primarily black churches in the American South. People could come together for big events, but when the events were over, they were still connected, they were still networking, they were still part of each other's lives. And if that's true, it says something significant about the power of strong tribes to create lasting change. During World War II, many of the fallen soldiers were buried right where they fell, in anonymous graves, often. Fearing such a fate would happen to one of their own, a company of U.S. soldiers in the heart of the French countryside approached a Catholic priest to ask if they could bury their fallen comrade in the small graveyard cemetery that was attached to the church there. And the priest turned them down for two reasons. One, the dead soldier wasn't Catholic, and only Catholics could be buried in the graveyard of the Catholic Church. Number two, there was really no room already. The graveyard was overcrowded. So disappointed, the men went away, and they buried him in a grave just outside the cemetery, and they marked it with a plain wooden cross. Within a couple months, the war was over, and the company of men was getting ready for their long journey back to the States, but before they wanted to say one last goodbye to their fallen comrade. And so they went back to the countryside cemetery. And when they got there, they walked all around the fence, and they couldn't find a trace of their friend's grave. They couldn't find the cross, and they thought that like the grumpy old priest had even taken away that memorial. And so they stormed over to the church ready to confront the guy. And as they came out, as they got near, the priest came out and met them, gave them a warm welcome, and said, "I'm so happy you've come back. After you left, I was troubled by my decision, and I realized the anguish that my decision caused you. I couldn't change the fact that the cemetery was so full, so I moved the boundary fence a meter or two so that your colleague's grave is now within the graveyard itself. I hope you can forgive me." What we're doing here is essentially creating a new tribe gathered around a simple idea that people are more important than beliefs, which is our number one core value. Actual, in the flesh, human beings, far more important than any abstraction, any ism, any ideology. We've gathered around this idea that it's possible to have the benefits of human community without the baggage of theology and dogma and superstitions. And we're creating a tribe that thinks our common humanity is enough to bind us together. We are a tribe dedicated to moving the fence. And I love this tribe that we're building together. And when I come here each week and see all the people who give so much of themselves to make this a reality, it makes me feel more hopeful about life in general, more hopeful about humanity, and heck, who knows, someday the Oasis movement may be bigger than the Grateful Dead.